Welcome back to the Whiskey Bonnet Podcast. I'm Conrad. This is my interview with F. Paul Pacult. I became interested in F. Paul Pacult because he is the blender behind Jacob's Pardon. If you haven't had their whiskey, they're doing some amazing stuff. But more importantly, he is an incredibly influential part of the history of whiskey and the story of whiskey, especially whiskey and media. He is one of the original spirits reviewers working for the New York Times and then having his own spirits review journal long before there were so many publications and long before any of us were here on the internet running our mouths and reviewing whiskey. So here's my conversation with F. Paul Pacult. This is going to be two things. This is going to be one, audio for the Whiskey Bonnet Podcast, but also just a fantastic conversation with Mr. F. Paul Pacult from Jacob's Pardon. And if you're not familiar, and we're going to let Paul kind of tell his own story a little bit, but Paul has an incredible history in whiskey and spirits as a writer, which I find incredibly fascinating. There's some wine background there, which a lot of whiskey people have. And then just the story of Jacob's Pardon. And if you're not familiar, I think it's a very cool story. And some of their product is absolutely mind-blowing. And we have the small batch number one here. We're going to try that out and just kind of talk a little bit about it. And we're going to put it on YouTube and let everybody just kind of experience it as we go. So, Mr. F. Paul Pacult. As my understanding, I learned a little bit about your background, and for anybody who's watching this on video, you can see Clara there from the public relations company. She's going to keep us honest in the conversation. But Mr. Pacult, Paul, I actually looked into your history a little bit and was quite fascinated to find out, and I didn't know this about you, and you have to excuse me for my ignorance, but that you actually have a very extensive history in writing. And you actually have a spirits journal that is quite renowned and quite well known and quite respected, and that is kind of what brought you to where we are today ultimately. But I would love to hear a little more about specifically the spirits journal and how much that had to play. I know there was a little part of the story of where you went to Scotland, and I know for me, my love of whiskey started with an experience I had in Ireland. So I would love to hear a little bit about kind of that initial experience in Scotland from that initial writing piece that you did and how that bloomed into what became the Spirits Journal and that story. I'd love to hear a little of that backstory.
Well, it was a complete accident.
It often is.
This was not a planned career in any sense of the word. So I take very little credit for it, to be honest.
That's very, very humble of you.
I've been the beneficiary of many wonderful opportunities and a whole bevy of wonderful people who were mentors and believed in me, maybe when I didn't even believe in myself. So it's kind of an interesting story in that it's a complete accident. None of it was planned. I worked in the wine industry for 10 years for a person I consider my first mentor, Rodney D. Strong. And I've always been writing my entire life. I've been writing. And my mother told me that when I was 14, I told her that I'd be a writer and an author. And I think I was just too busy smoking pot at that point. But anyway, I came to New York after working for Rod and leaving him. And I largely left him because he said, you should go and write. You're really good at that particular ability. But you should go and give it a try and go to New York. Don't stay in California. Go to New York, go to the big leagues. But here's the deal on that. I don't want you to call me until you're writing for the New York Times.
Wow.
So I have to say, I was, Conrad, to be honest, I was kind of crushed when he said that because, I wanted to be able to call Rod and say, look, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And so I didn't. So I honored his request. So I left in California in 1982, the autumn of 1982, landed in New York, got settled, was working for, again, another mentor couple, Roberta and Peter Morell, who own, one of the most famous wine shops in America. And they were teaching me a lot about wine and letting me go to all the different tastings. Then I just started writing on a very furious pace, and I was getting accepted wherever I'd submit a story. I'd get accepted, and I think, hey, this is pretty easy, Gee, this I'm not going to have to struggle and do the whole struggling writers thing. This is great. And so in 1989, in the spring of 89, I was teaching a class on wine, and three gentlemen from the New York Times happened to be taking the class. And after the class was finished, they came up and one of them said, we've been following your writings and really, really like your style because you're so irreverent. You're not afraid to say, I hate this stuff or I really love this stuff and this is why. And would you like to write for the New York Times? And after I regained consciousness, I just said, look, you have Frank Pryal as the wine writer, the greatest wine writer of this generation. And there's no, and they said, no, just stop. We want you to write about Scotch whiskey. I'm a wine guy. I know nothing about, Scotch whiskey is brown. I'm used to yellow and red. I can't, they said, do you want the job or not? And what do you say at that point? So, yeah.
Yes. You say,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Okay. But I said, you have to understand, I know nothing. And they said, well, get some books, bone up as much as you can. I called them a week later and said, there aren't any books. Because at that time, Conrad, nobody was writing about spirits in America. I mean, nobody. There was nothing out there. So after about a week, they called me back and said, we'll send you over to Scotland for 2 weeks. Get as much information as you can. Come back with 5,000 words written, and we'll go from there. So I did that. Soon as I landed in Edinburgh, I knew my life had changed incredibly without even going to the first distillery. So over the next 2 weeks, I went to 2, sometimes 3 distilleries a day. I really maximized the time. Came back, I wrote 10,000 words and submitted it to the Times. And I wrote so much just because I was so psyched. I was so excited about this. And I didn't hear from the Times for about 3 weeks, maybe even longer, maybe about 3.5, 4 weeks. And I thought, I've screwed up my big opportunity, and I overwrote by 100%, and I have screwed up my whole career. So I called the Times, my contact there, Rich Calandria, and I said, geez, I'm so sorry, Rich. I know I overwrote it. And he said, what are you talking about? We're passing it around the office. It's so good. Can you do 2,000 more words? So,
Wow.
so it ended up a 12,000 word article, 28 pages long in the Sunday Times on, I think it was December 3rd or December 4th of 1989.
That's
And it
incredible.
caused a sensation. The Times staff went crazy with phone calls and letters saying, why aren't you doing more on Scotch? Why aren't you doing more on cognac? Why aren't you doing more on vodka? And so after that, they signed me up and I wrote about that stuff for 17 years in the Times.
Well, I do have a question I would like, and this may be something we can task Clara to doing. I would love if I could get some assistance in tracking down a copy of that original article. I would absolutely, I'm sure it's somewhere online in perpetuity. I'd love to read it. That would be really fantastic. Okay, I'll get with Clara and get a copy of that. I'm curious because I have my own experience, but and I think this happens to a lot of people. But when you say you got over there to Scotland and you stepped out of the plane, is there a definitive moment where you were at a specific distillery or talking to a specific person that was uniquely impactful for you, where you just said, oh man, wow, there's really something special there? Because I know I had an experience with a Irish bartender in a pub in Ireland. We were by ourselves. My wife and I were in there by ourselves, and his story and the way he spoke when he poured and the history was just impactful for me in a way that I still remember to this day. So do you have a moment in time where you can remember when you're there and you go, there's really a lot here? I mean,
I think it was probably that first trip, because subsequently I've been over 28 times. Um, but it was on that first trip, I drove up to the Dalmore distillery
Okay.
and was talking to the distillery manager, who was absolutely lovely. In fact, everybody who I visited, they were so charming and so hospitable. I couldn't say enough about how kind they all were to me. Um, but this guy was wonderful. I said, Ian, how long have you been here at the distillery? I mean, and he looked quite young and he said, Oh, Paul, going on 40 years now, and I'm getting to like it. And then, and then, and then I said, but Ian, doesn't your brother Angus work here also? And he said, oh yeah, Angus. He's been here now for 27 years, but it's on a temporary basis. And there was something about how charming that whole and so easy it came. And he wasn't trying to be funny. He just was funny.
Right.
And that's when I thought, this place is something special and I want to keep coming back here. But Conrad, it was like that every distillery I'd go to. I mean, Ian stands out just because I fell out of my chair laughing. But it was there was something special at each distillery stop. There was something charming, or there was something that I thought, oh, this wouldn't happen necessarily in the US. Um, they were so self-effacing. There was no hubris. There was no,
Mm.
gee, aren't we great? Everything was very low key, very subtle in their humor, in their approach. And I found that so pleasant to be around. That's why I kept going back, kept writing about it.
So how much of that humor do you think that it's a combination, that sense of the lack of self-importance and the lightness and the passion about it, how friendly everybody is it feels like, one, it's an art form, and an art form breeds a lot of passion, and when there's a lot of passion, it exudes out of people, and it tends to be non-pretentious when there's a lot of passion about something. And I think the combination of that, plus the fact that in the light of the massive significance and the long history of distilling, especially in the United Kingdom and in Ireland and Scotland, that any one person, no matter how significant they are, like yourself, obviously a very significant contributor to this whole thing, or Ian, a very significant contributor to this whole thing, plays such a small part, and ultimately a small part of this thing that is so much bigger because of the massive significance of the history and all of the people and all of the stories and the cities built and the battles fought and all of these things all over this spirit that's just so ingrained in not only in our past but in our present. I think that those two things does tend to make everybody that I meet in this area, in this subject matter, to be warm and happy to talk, and generous and welcoming. I mean, I've had more times where people go, "You got to come see this. You got to try this. You got to do that," and they make you feel like family. It's incredible, and it just is something that I've had repetitively again and again and again as an experience. So, I mean, where do you think that comes from? I mean, is it more of the art? What is it about spirits that just does that? Because I can't think of another topic matter where I know of anyway, where there's such an overwhelming tendency towards generosity and humble and friendly. And I don't mean, what do you think that is?
I think a lot of it has to do with, and I totally agree with absolutely every word you've said, because we obviously have the same take on the personalities involved. Um, I think it's because in hospitality, as well as in beverage alcohol, people are in it, sure, to make a living. Of course, I'm not stupid enough to think that people aren't in it to make a living, but they're also in it because they have a passion for it. They love the fact that they're involved with owning a restaurant and serving people, or being a bartender and supplying joy to their community, which I always tell bartenders, you're supplying joy to your neighborhood.
Mm.
Don't never forget that. And with the distillers or the brewers or the winemakers, it's a noble industry. I mean, these industries go back in some cases a couple thousand years. And so there's such a great a sense of generational kindness and pushing the ball forward down the field
Mm.
in our present generation, and how important that is to honor everybody who came behind us. I think it's just kind of natural that there's a humility about it. I know when I was first starting about spirits, um, and I would meet people like Colin Scott of Chivas Regal, or Richard Patterson, or in Cognac, Bernard Hine, or Jan Falou, or Elan Royer, who taught me how to taste and how to appreciate. I couldn't be anything but humbled in being around these people, because they were so aware uh, of the rich history of each of their particular category, of their each discipline, that you couldn't help but feel, wow, to take it seriously, what they were doing and what they were telling you. So I think a lot of it is that there's a sense of responsibility if you're a distiller to do it right. Because you look at a guy like Jimmy Russell, who just, his 70th anniversary at Wild
Yeah,
Turkey was just a
it's
day or
wild.
two ago. You look at somebody like that and you think, my God, why is he still doing this? This is a guy who said, I've never come to work one day in my life. Now, what does that tell you about somebody who loves what they do? That says everything in just one sentence. So to be around people like that, I just find so incredibly inspiring for me. I mean, they have lifted me up so many, countless times, just telling their story or just saying, "Hi, come on in. Do you want to taste something?" It's a wonderful thing, and that's why, even at 75, somebody said a couple months ago, "Yeah, you ever think of retiring?" And retire to what?
Yeah.
What am I going to collect stamps? You know, I know the greatest people in the world. So,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, you're living the dream, Paul, which is, I think you nailed it. Is I think everybody ultimately would want to do the thing that they love and call it work. I would like you to, I'd like you to brag on yourself a little bit, because I kind of want to know about the Spirits Journal, because honestly, I don't know that much about it, and I was quite impressed. It really kind of blown away that I don't know more about it after reading into it a little bit. This really is a very significant thing. Your Spirits Journal. So so please, in a manner that I'm set aside the humbleness for a little bit. I'd like you to talk about, how this thing came about, and how significant it really is, because I think a lot of people that are going to hear this are not going to be really aware of the Spirits Journal in a way that you might assume.
well, the caveat is that we have retired it. Sue and I stopped it in, I think, December of 2018 or 2019, so I could finish two books. Um, it started all because of the New York Times. I have to blame the Times for just about everything in the a career. Um, but because I was suddenly the only person in the States writing regularly about whiskey through the Times, and then cognac, and then vodka, and then cocktails, all the producers of spirits in America and beyond started sending me stuff
Mm,
to my office, um, just because they wanted me to write about them, because there was no other writer at the time.
okay.
So in 1991, I think, Conrad, I happened to be talking to Robert Parker, the wine advocate, uh, megastar. And Bob was really pleasant to me. And I was saying, geez, I have all this stuff, hundreds of bottles sitting in my office. I don't know what to do. Everybody keeps sending me stuff. Every day there's another UPS or a FedEx delivery coming. What do you think I should do with them? And he said, well, look what I do.
Okay.
I I have a subscription free non-advertising, no advertising allowed newsletter that goes to tons of people, every quarter, whatever Bob did at the time. And he said, why don't you do that for spirits? He said, there's nobody out there. You are it, man. So take advantage of it. And so I took his advice and started up the Spirit Journal sometime a few months after that, after tasting a whole bunch of stuff. And then it just continued for, I think, Sue then came on, became publisher and editor, and she took it to places I couldn't imagine. I don't have a great business mind. She does. Um, and at its apex, I think we had about 20,000 or 30,000 subscribers. It was big. It really was big. But we saw how big it was just because of everywhere I'd be sitting on a subway train in New York, and then I'd see, oh, Paul Pacult says Highland Park 18 is the greatest spirit in the world on a poster in the subway, or a bus would go by and Spirit Journal 5 stars to so. Or you open up a magazine and there'd be 3 ads in the magazine touting something that we said, unless they got 1 or 2 stars, of course. But
Of course.
and then those people said other things like, "We're gonna kill you." Uh, though I have to tell you, there is one star rating that people still bring up to me for what I said about it. And I keep saying, why do you focus on the negative? Why not look at all the 4 and 5 star review things I gave? But the one that people bring up is a horrible thing that's still in the marketplace called Tequila Rose, which
Tequila
is
Rose.
tequila and strawberry, some horrible. And
It sounds questionable.
in the negative review, I called it Pepto Dismal. And people will still come up to me and say, "Oh, I remember when you called it Pepto Dismal, and that was the fun." And then they spout off 2 or 3 other negative reviews, and that wasn't what the Spirit Journal was about: building things up, not necessarily tearing them down. But I was candid, and people appreciated the fact that I wasn't afraid to say, "Do not buy this crap. Whatever you do, if you buy it, I'll never talk to you again." So,
is Tequila Rose still around? Do you know?
I think so. It's still around, and
I'm gonna Google it as soon as we're done with this.
yeah.
I've now I'm a very positive person and I would never focus on the negatives, but my curiosity is absolutely piqued at the thing that is lingered as Paul's worst review, the Tequila Rose. I'm not gonna be the only one that does that. I guarantee people are gonna hear this and go, okay,
Uh,
I gotta try
well,
that. I'm gonna order some of
the
that.
funny follow-up, Conrad, is this. For a long time, Sue and I ran something called the Ultimate Beverage Challenge. And in the Spirits Challenge, I remember Sue got a call from the producer of Tequila Rose saying, "Oh, well, we have these products we want to enter into the spirits competition." And she looked at the list and Sue said, "One of them's Tequila Rose. I don't think I would take that one out." And they were, no, we want to put it in. And Sue's going, "Oh no, please, please don't."
Suit yourself. How could they not be aware? How could they not be aware of this? That's the Pepto Bismol is brilliant. It's just fantastic. It's gonna stick in my head now. I may or may not have to reference that into talking about it at some point. So I want to know what that moment was like when you saw your name on an advertisement where a company was saying, "We're so good that Paul said we're good." I mean, that's got to be a surreal moment. I can't imagine what that would feel like. What was that like?
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, it took me by surprise a lot, because
I bet
I
it did.
never expected the Spirit Journal to be a big deal.
Well,
Um,
again, it's one of those things that you're another perfect example. You did something you were super passionate about, and I think it translates. When you're super passionate about something, people have a way of cluing in on that. They have a way of perceiving it. I think even when they don't realize that they're doing that personal passion and honesty and just really being true to yourself and speaking what's on your mind without consideration for advertisers, as you said, or any other inputs. There's just there's an appeal to that, especially now. I think it's getting to be more true because there's just so much just fake or built or the
Mhm.
credibility and real people like yourself. And that's why I think this was going to be an appealing thing to talk about is to meet someone like yourself. And it doesn't surprise me that there was a need for that, a want for that when you started doing it. Because I think people
Yeah.
just they clue in and go, wow, that is really cool. That is really
Well,
cool that he's so passionate about it. I want to see that. I want to experience that and see that for myself. And man, it's just it's really amazing. That's incredible that you're that far
I
ahead of
think
it.
a lot of the reason for the success of the Spirit Journal was the fact that we never accepted advertising. And we, believe me when I say, we had a lot of offers because we did.
Okay.
But Sue and I just agreed early on, never, ever, nothing would we ever do to promote an event, nothing. It was just strictly 100 to 150 reviews every issue, and that was it. With a little bit of editorial, but mostly it was just the reviews, 1 to 5 stars, boom, that's it.
I'm not aware, maybe you are, of a publication that exists that's still doing that. Because the ones that I'm aware of, and I don't want to put them on blast, but they all have advertising. And I know that if advertising is involved, it's going to skew things, if even just a little. I mean, it almost has to
It
by
does.
nature. So I mean, I don't know. Are you aware of of a
No,
rating publication that doesn't use advertising that's like that anymore?
not a publication, no.
A lot of it's moved to a lot of it has moved to the internet, and
Yeah.
it's kind of I think that's why what I do and people like me do is become a thing because we're just regular people without
Right.
vested interest in a company, or I have no interest in this other than I just want to talk to you. I mean, I went out and bought the bottle myself. I just curious to talk to you for the person that you are and kind of find out your history, and so I think that's why we are able to do what we do is because you were the proof of concept that the idea is appealing to
Mhm.
people, and the power of the internet is kind of just multiplied that. But so I want to know, here you are writing for the Spirits Journal and reviewing everything. I mean, like you said, just rums and cognacs and vodkas and sojus or whatever the heck else is out there. So why then, moving into Jacob's Pardon, why did you choose whiskey and bourbon? I mean, you could have done anything. You could have made a cognac. You could have done anything. Why not a scotch? Why a bourbon and American whiskey? Why go that direction? What drew that?
Well, okay, I'm letting you in on a secret here. Uh,
Okay. People are going to hear this, Paul, just for the record.
well, um, I've been consulting now for about 21 years to huge companies. You name the company, I've probably consulted for them at some point. So I've actually been doing this for a long time. As a blender, as somebody who will advise companies on either to make a new product and will it fit into the marketplace, or to give a refreshing style change to a well-established product. So yeah, so I have worked probably on every category. So it's not new, but I've never really been up. I've never talked about this publicly. Jacob's Pardon was different in that, for one thing, um, I've always been very close to the gentleman, Dave Singh, who is the project manager. I love Dave, actually. He and I worked on Partita Tequila together. Um, and Dave, without question, is one of the most respected members of the spirits community. Everybody knows him, everybody loves him. They know what a great, great executive he is. So it was a joy for me when he called up and said, geez, I'm working on this thing for Palm Bay and Mark Taub and Mark's family. It's called Jacob's Pardon, and had lunch with the Palm Bay crew. And when they told me the story about it, um, I just thought the story was terrific. about Jacob Taub and being put in the slammer for being uh, not necessarily a distiller because he wasn't distilling, but he was certainly buying distillate and then reformulating it during Prohibition of all. My God, during Prohibition. I mean, my grandmother made bathtub gin. So
Yeah.
uh, everybody was a rectifier during the Prohibition, let's face it. But Jacob Taub and his brother got put in the slammer for it. And when FDR, thank God, came on the scene and vowed in 1931 during his presidential campaign that he was going to end the whole folly of prohibition, which basically bankrupted America.
Hmm.
And so thank God he did, because he liked his daily martini, which he made them and they were bloody awful. Nonetheless, thank God he did that. So then, as part of it, he was releasing all of these people who had been so wrongly incarcerated. And one of them was Jacob Taub. And that's why Jacob's pardon, that's the story behind it. Now, why did I like the story? It's because there are so many false and misleading product stories out there that aren't authentic. They're just the the dream of some idiot copywriter someplace in a marketing department. Oh, let's see. Well, maybe if we do this and we include a cat in the story, it'll somehow, so you
Yeah.
have all of these product stories which don't have one iota of truth to them. So it was so refreshing for me, one, because Dave was involved and said, gee, come and have lunch, we'll tell you the story. But I thought the story was terrific because it was real. It was real. They had the documentation. They had Franklin Delano Roosevelt's signature
Wow.
on the release form for Jacob, and he was taken out of incarceration.
That's
I
incredible.
just thought that story alone is worth getting involved in. And this was, God, I think it must be, Conrad, I think we had lunch in 2018 or so. So it's been a while.
Yeah.
So I was quite happy to be publicly associated with a brand that was authentic. So that's why.
Yeah, it's that's the thing that stood out to me initially too. I mean, my experience with Jacob's Pardon started with somebody sending me one of the batch threes at a 140 something proof because the whiskey community always has a fascination with the hazmat over 140. So someone sent it to me and I was blown away by it, and we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. But I then said, okay, well, what the heck is this thing? And the next thing I bumped into was the story of the pardon, and I was like, man, okay, I love a good story. I love real people behind it. I love the history. It's incredible. So that's what clued me in on it. So when the opportunity came up to sit and talk with you, I'm like, that's yes, absolutely 100%. Um, so you are primarily, and stop me if I get into something you don't want to talk about, but so you are the driving force behind what the tasting experience when you drink Jacob's Pardon is. You are the primary blender and the driving force behind this. Is it just you, or are some of the descendants of Jacob actually participating in that with you?
At the moment, Conrad, I'm doing all the blending myself, and it's a joy. But I will tell you, it's a blending is a humbling experience. I mean, we have about 2,500, 2,600 barrels that I'm dealing with. So I'm trying to find all these different combinations, or special barrels where I say, oh no, this has got to be just a single cask release because this baby is so special. But it's a big deal. It's a big job.
Well, and it's funny to me because I meet a lot of master distillers and a lot of master blenders, and it's almost like there are two different things at work there, where your master distillers are masters of letting nature do the thing that it does with the distillate and the wood, and then you got master blenders who, like yourself, it's incredibly fascinating to me that you can go through and taste through and keep track of all of these barrels and look for these certain profiles and try to differentiate one from the other. Because I know myself, when I try to do a lineup of a whole bunch of things and taste through and rank a bunch of things, it becomes exceedingly difficult to try and separate one from the other in a meaningful way. And here you are, going out and grabbing 30, 40, 50 barrels or whatever it is in that batch and saying, okay, these all kind of fit the same profile. This is what I want to work with. This one is special and different in the right way. I just it boggles the mind. I don't know if you had an opportunity to see. I sat down with Donis Todd, who's the master distiller down at Garrison Brothers, and he was talking about how he looks for 50 barrels. There are 50 barrels that go into this small batch that he makes. I'm like, what? I mean, you're out there drilling all day long.
Yeah.
My palate would be numb after nine. So, I mean, I'm curious, do you have do you keep track with a system of notes? Are you only doing a very small amount per day? Do you have to, this has just got to be devastating to your palate to try and, I'm assuming it's a process you do over many, many days and have to try and come up with some system to keep notes of that. I mean, I know it's probably a lot more complicated. You can tell me, a minute or two, but could you give me a little bit of insight as to how the heck you keep track of that?
Well, first of all, um, I'm standing on some pretty broad shoulders. People who taught me, and between cognac, Armagnac, American whiskey, Scotch whiskey, um, I learned from some of the greatest blenders of all time. So, and they had different regimens that they used. Richard Patterson um, would, in Scotland, would taste and smell. Colin Scott would typically, at least when I was with him, would just smell only.
Huh.
Jan Filou from Hennessy Cognac would have two or three people with him rather than being alone. Um, Bernard Hine um, would mostly taste. So I kind of put together a system for myself that primarily uses, and of course, now that I can't breathe because of allergies, I probably shouldn't even be saying this, but I I use my sense of smell more than anything. Because I've done a lot of research on how the five senses work together and individually.
Hmm.
Because have done several seminars on sensory perception with beverage alcohol and what are the most important, why do they work together, or how do they work best individually. And for me, um, I guess I've been blessed with a particularly acute sense of smell. So that's what I use mostly. So, for instance, um, well, let's take this. This is batch number 3, which was gleaned from 211 barrels of whiskey from MGP in Indiana.
Okay.
Uh, Mash bill 99% corn, 1% malted barley, uh, barreled, I believe, in December of 2004. So it's got a lot of age on it, a lot of complexity. And I found that when I was going through the different barrels, that it was much better for me to smell, go back, smell again. And then I'd go back after I'd picked out from 2 inhalations, ones that I thought might be really, really good or special. Then I'd go back and I'd taste those. But that's how I did it. I mean, another blender might say, oh no, Pacult's out of his mind, or he was smelling too much or smelling too deeply. Because again, these are cask strength. Um, so it's different for each person. I think each blender, they use, if their taste mechanism, if their palate is much more accurate than the sense of smell, then I think they use that.
Yeah, I find that as much as I've tried to this point, I still consider myself to be very inept at tasting only because I will meet people like yourself or master blenders or master distillers, and they just have this depth of understanding that I think that comes probably like yourself. You talk about a naturally acute sense of smell, and there are people that are known for that for sure. And I definitely don't have a natural. My wife's much better at it naturally than I am. But I know there's also an amount of development that happens in practice and in compounding of experience. And I think what's really cool and unique about you is because you have this experience across this broad spectrum of different types of spirits. It just makes me think of times when I had a whiskey that was cognac finished, and I'm actually running into the other room trying to find a cognac and trying to go, where's that cognac finish at? So you've experienced all of these different forms of distillates and spirits, and I think it gives you a very unique perspective. So it's fascinating. You've developed this over time, and probably it sounds like to me that you've taken a natural ability and layered on top of it a lot of experience and practice and input from other professionals to build this talent that you have into something. Tiger Woods has a propensity for golf, but he also hit a hell of a lot of golf balls.
Sure.
So it's incredible. I mean, I admire that a great deal because it is an incredible talent that is not
Well,
natural.
I think also, the other thing, Conrad, that the fact that I worked in the wine industry for 9 years in Sonoma County, California, I think that's really where I first got accustomed to picking out different aspects of wine, but then filing them away. For whatever reason, I have a really good ability of recall,
Hmm.
so that I'll taste or smell something in a Sauvignon Blanc, but I'll remember what that key element was a few years down the line. So I think after a while, again, because of the times that asked me then to start reviewing things, I just applied that. But because, I mean, as you know, because distillates are so much more potent than most wines, you had to kind of ratchet that quality, that ability up a little bit. So, so I really think I've had this tremendous luxury of learning first in a gentler arena of
Hmm.
wine and moved on to the bigger leagues with spirits, building along the way. And then,
Hmm.
and then having the incredible fortune of learning from all of these masters who were incredibly generous with their time and didn't lose patience a lot of the times when I'd go, oh, that's apricot, and somebody would go, no, you idiot, that's not it, that's apple, that's apple. So uh, I just remember Bernard Hine and cognac always exploding when I'd do something wrong. He's like, no, Paul, you're better than that. You're better than that. I know you're better than that. You remember stuff like that. So I think the ability of recall is also really important to being a blender. That you can go back, or as you say, go through 30 or 40 different samples, but remember number 18 and what
Yeah.
was special about number 18. Um, but in all honesty, I, I always, I always think if you do something enough, you can become pretty good at it. I've had the
Agreed.
good fortune of being surrounded with all of this stuff and surrounded by people who knew much, much more than I could ever hope to know. So, I've been the receiver of this incredible bank of knowledge and experience. And I think anybody could really become a really good taster. I don't think it's any special ability. I think it's just repetition.
Hmm. Well, I appreciate that. That's very encouraging. So, so, I want you to talk to me a little bit about the actual whiskey Jacob's Pardon. But before we do that, Jacob's Pardon aside,
Yeah.
because besides Jacob's Pardon, is there a whiskey, a scotch, a bourbon, or something that really stands out in your mind after all of these years and all of these things that you've tried as being truly exceptional and that stands above everything else, and you just go, that was really, really something special
Oh,
to me.
my.
Is there one that really? I know there's gonna be a lot of them, but can you give
Wow.
me one that just made you go,
Uh, I would have to say, as far as something that's available, I've always felt that Highland Park 18-year-old, and
That's
I mean,
great.
I said it some years ago, and they Highland Park ran with this in their advertising for years, that I said Highland Park 18, in my opinion, was the greatest of all spirits in the world, any category. It was my desert island whiskey. It was my desert island. I'd take it over water. It was what I wanted on the desert island.
That's
Um,
that's quite
probably,
a that's quite an accolade there, Paul.
but probably the one that stands out as the biggest surprise to me was I was sitting in a bar and it sounds like the beginning of a joke. Um, this horse walks into a bar and the bartender says, "Hey, why the long face?" Okay, so it's not that. Uh, I'm sitting in a bar with James Morrison and Jim McEwen. Jim McEwen at the time was the master blender and master distiller for Bowmore on the island of Isla. Um, Morrison was at that time the owner. And we're sitting in this bar, and Morrison pulls out this very, very dark colored liquid. And he says, "I'm about to give you something that nobody except for myself and Jim have had, but we're going to release it and we hope that you like it." And it was a 1964 Bowmore Scotch, single malt Scotch that had been aged exclusively in sherry casks for dozens and dozens of years. And it was utterly sensational. I almost did a backflip out of my chair. It was so delicious. And it was just so unexpected because that was the first time I'd ever seen that wonderful marriage of very, very old Scotch from Isla and very, very intense sherry cask. And it just blew me away. And that has stayed with me. I still have about that much of it, Conrad, which of course is gone completely. But that was the best experience I ever had. But the best spirit, without any doubt, has been the 18-year-old Highland Park.
Okay, well, if someone is hearing this right now and is not trying, I've had the Highland Park 18 and I absolutely love it. And I know we had it when we were tasting some things against some other very nice scotches of similar age, and it definitely stood out as being unique. And Highland Park, isn't Highland Park the distillery that's actually in a unique area of Scotland all in of its own? It's part of the Highlands,
Orkney,
but it's yeah,
the
isn't it
Orkney
northern
Islands.
Orkney Islands? Isn't that northern?
It is.
Yes.
It's the Orkney Islands are off the north coast of Scotland, but a little bit south of the Shetland Islands.
So is that are those islands the northernmost point where Scotch is made, or is there?
Yep.
Yeah, so
That
it struck me. I remember that because everybody does Speyside, Highland, Lowland, Isla. Everybody kind of knows this, but here Highland Park exists up here
yeah.
and in its own little thing, and it does have a uniqueness to it. And I don't know why it gets overlooked so much. I don't get a lot of people asking about it, or we don't talk about it a
Yeah,
lot. And
amazing to me.
well,
It's a big
hopefully
kept
a lot of
secret.
people hear this. I hope a lot of people hear this and go out and buy Highland Park 18. You heard it here. Paul said it unequivocally. So Paul, you have in front of you a little bit of the um number 3. So
I
that is
do.
the over 140. What's the proof on the new batch?
This is oh my goodness, it's 71.35 alcohol. Now, so why did I do that?
Yes. Why did you
Couple
do
re
that?
couple reasons. At the time, and this was blended about a year and a half ago. At the time, cask strength was the darling of consumers. I'm seeing a different trend now, where I think people, even savvy whiskey drinkers, are kind of saying, "Okay, we've done that." And I think they're now getting to the point where they like a little bit of reduction from cask strength. But the reason that I like this is the fact that no way does it drink like 140 proof. No way. It probably drinks only like maybe 138. No, uh, probably
I
drinks.
just I just said that to somebody today, Paul. That exact thing. My experience with that, I think my first one was probably the batch two, because you're on the three now.
Yeah,
Uh, it that was exactly what it was. The flavor was so big and so bold, and just this intense sweet syrupiness. It struck me, and and I didn't know what the proof was. When I found out what the proof was, I literally re-drank it, and I'm like, that's just wild that something at that proof point can drink so
yeah.
easily. That's why I was so fascinated and wanted to talk to you. Part of the reason I want to talk to you too is I've tried quite a few of these cast drinks, and for me, cast strength is not a this is it. I love a low proof and a 140 and everything in between for their own reasons, and I think proof is not necessarily indication of the best state of that whiskey. Some whiskeys exist at a lower proof better than at a higher proof, and I enjoy when I can find someone like yourself that knows what shines at what proof and can release a 140 that is not that is not 140 just to be 140 because it shines at 140. There's a reason, and it's interesting. I love to hear you say that because I think it absolutely does, and there is not a ton of examples of ABVs over 70 that are that approachable, that
Mhm.
are that are that it's really nice, Paul. I mean, it's just it's astonishing. It was just so. I mean, I'm gonna try this batch this number one here, the small batch one. I'll have you talk to me about that in a minute. But so what is there something specifically different about the new batch over the last batch? Is it an evolution in a way? Or are we just trying to kind of capture some of that same magic and release a new batch? How much different is it than the last batch?
Different mash bills.
Yeah. So
Um,
what's the mash bill on this one again? One more time.
Number one, that's the one that you have, Conrad.
Okay.
Number one is 8 years old, and
Correct.
that's a majority of MGP light whiskey and a little bit of a minority of George Dickel Tennessee whiskey.
Okay.
Um, and that was, I think, released at 48.55 proof or alcohol by volume.
Yeah, why that proof, Paul? Because it's interesting. That's obviously has been proofed down some,
Yeah.
right? But you stopped. Why did you stop at 48.55? Did you just prove it down till it tasted right?
Well, I will, in fact, just these past couple weeks, for another release that's going to be coming out in the late autumn. Uh, I go through probably 6 to 7 different levels of proof. And just I like to do so many because I like to find that sweet spot where all the components, everything just comes together in this harmonious marriage, um, taste, um, texture, which I also find sometimes gets lost in the conversation. Texture is so important to a consumer, but also the aroma. How do all of these play at different levels of strength? And then I'll try to read the mind of the average consumer because I'm not looking necessarily to a connoisseur. I'm not necessarily looking to somebody who's a collector of finer whiskeys. I want to approach the person who is just going to go in and say, "Oh, gee, I kind of like that bottle. Wonder what it's like." Um, and it's within their price point and they take it. That's the person I want to approach, and that's the person who I want to enjoy this. So I just try to find that sweet spot where I think the average female or male consumer will go, hey, this is pretty good. I see why it's at this strength. All these parts different really come together.
Well, you nailed that with the number three, with the small batch three, because my wife is absolutely a giant fan of that release. She loves that the proof on that and the flavor. This I want to ask you before I tell you. This is the first time I've tried the 48.55, the batch, the number one. Do you call it batch one? How do you like to refer to
Yeah.
those? Okay, because you got batch one, batch one, release two. So you got batch three. This is the third release of batch three that you got now.
No, this
No.
is this that the whole batch is just one entire release.
Okay.
So
So
batch one was one group.
okay.
Two was the next group of barrels, and three is the third group of barrels. But again, each one of the mash bills are different.
So why? What is it that you're getting? I'm curious out of this as a blender of your caliber.
Hmm.
What are you pulling out of the Dickel part of that? Because you said you blended just a little bit of Dickel. What characteristics or notes are you pulling out of that Dickel specifically? Why add the little bit of Dickel? What does it do to it?
It rounds off the MGP light whiskey. That's why I added that, because the MGP light whiskey it was a feral cat, is really what it was. It was, it was just a street fight in the alley. And it needed something just to kind of round off that edginess. And the Dickel, which is one of my favorite distilleries in America, without any doubt, is in Tullahoma, Tennessee. And that's the George Dickel Distillery. The refinement of those whiskeys is world class. So it just seemed like a good marriage to have this street fighter with this other personality, which would kind of bring a little bit of gentleness to the street fighting aspect and make a better whole, make the sum much better than the individual parts. And that's why really just kind of
Mm.
it tamed a little bit of the ferocity of the light whiskey from MGP.
Well, I can tell you in my very humble opinion that's it's exceptionally well done. I mean, I'm really quite for an offering that I honestly have quite overlooked a bit because of how loud the proof causes the other batch to stand out. That when you put 70%, that draws everybody's attention. That's what everybody talks about in Jacob's Pardon. And I wanted to specifically grab this one because I was very curious as well. What is this? What exists at a lower proof? What exists at the lower price point? The price point is
Yeah.
actually very reasonable. And I will tell you, and I want you to tell me. You mentioned the mouthfeel and the texture of it. The end of the palate into the finish on this gives me a creaminess to the texture that is very reminiscent for me of a lot of Irish whiskey.
Hmm.
It just has a it's silky, it's smooth, it's very
Yeah.
nice. And for me, usually that is something that I go and grab an Irish whiskey for.
Mhm.
How the heck did you do that, Paul? Could
That's
you
Conrad, that's the Dickel. That's
really?
that's that beautiful roundness brought out by the Dickel that just it really, I really believe it tamed what was a very vigorous, out there, almost aggressive whiskey, but it tamed it. And that's why I put in not a great percentage, but just enough to kind of make that a little bit more easy, a little bit more approachable.
That Paul, that's a
And
beautiful
then by
whiskey.
lowering the proof, it brought the qualities of the Dickel out that much more. And that's what's in the finish is the Dickel.
So I wanna that's a beautiful whiskey, Paul. Absolutely incredible. I mean, you don't need me to tell you that, but that's I am pleasantly surprised at how much I like that. And I'm not saying just because you're here. I'd do some kind of weird verbal word salad if I wasn't 100% sure how I felt about it. But I do want to point out though for anybody that's listening, this is non-chill filtered. I just love, and I don't know how many people do this, and I can't think of any off the top of my head that you proofed this down until it was right, and then we have this 48.55%. I think the propensity of most whiskeys are either going to be proofed down to a round number, be it 100 or 107, 101, or you're going to have this very specific down to the tenths and hundredths on the percentage because it's going to be the way that it came out of the cask. So that's really fascinating. I'm gonna have to do some research as to who else does that. But man, Paul, I'm quite impressed with that, being that this is supposed to be your entry level whiskey. And I'd hate to use that term because
No,
You know?
but you're right. That's why I tamed it from 70 proof yeah, well, from 70% alcohol down to a more reasonable factor, just because I wanted people, especially this is the first release, wanted a broad audience to accept it and just see. Maybe they like it, maybe they didn't. But I thought it was better to have a little bit easier, more user-friendly ABV on that.
Yeah, I think it's a good call. As much as I really enjoy as a whiskey enthusiast and as someone who seeks to try and find things that are different at this point, it's hard to find things that are different because there's so much stuff that, even good stuff, that kind of is like this is like that is like this is like that, and there's always
Right.
this. It's pretty
Right.
unusual. I try something and go, well, that's different. I do find the cast strengths and the high proof stuff fascinating for that reason. But I will tell you, on a daily basis, when I'm sitting on my couch, you absolutely nailed it. It is rare that I will reach for a even over 120 proof. If I'm just sitting with my wife watching television, I'm not going to grab something that high proof. I want something that is more pleasant, it is
Yeah.
easier, that I can
Yeah.
just relax and enjoy rather than a thing that makes you sit up and, really it causes your mind to race a little bit. I want to just sip and go, man, that's nice. And that's nice. And it's that you really nailed that. That is a fantastic bottle.
Well,
Um,
you're very kind. Thank you.
I would like to hear because I will tell you, and I don't know if you're even aware of this. I just want your spin on this. This is tough, top of my head. When I talk about Dickel, and I do a review of Dickel, or we have discussions about Dickel. Dickel seems to be very polarizing. Like it seems like whiskey drinkers either love it or hate it, and they always refer to a minerality that is with. That's the word that is always used. But I found that the Dickel that I've tried, um, I've liked it. You let it set and let it breathe a little, open up a little bit. It really is pleasant and wonderful. But I've not heard of anybody speak about Dickel in the way that you just spoke about it, about it being how wonderful it is. And you did mention the quality of distilling. So maybe you can tell me just a little bit more about your take specifically on the George Dickel distillery, because it is something that I feel like comes up a lot and people kind of seem to be split on it. So tell me about why you find George Dickel to be such a great distillery, great product.
I've always found their whiskeys to be very supple and succulent, big in texture. And some people, and I get it, that some consumers don't particularly like that aspect because they might consider it being overly done, overly toasty, overly sweet. Um, I find that very nice in that if I'd like a cigar, that would be a whiskey, an American whiskey that I'd have with a cigar,
Hmm.
just because there's a lot of tobacco-like qualities of it. And some of that could be the charcoal filtering, the Lincoln County process. Could be partly that. I actually think it's more of their philosophy of distillation. They like to distill at a little lower level, which automatically brings much more intensity, and also much more body to it, as opposed to Jack Daniels, their neighbor a little bit to the northeast. It, it's a very different approach to how they do it. And this is no slam on Jack Daniels at all, because actually I think Jack Daniels is doing a good job right now. But Dickel is a very, very different approach to distillation. And I also think the quality of the barrels that they use is also another very important aspect to them. They go out and they find the best wood that they could possibly get for the money. And they tend to age at level 3 char, level 4 char, which also brings a lot of personality to it. And just from all the 30 some biochemical aspects of white oak, they draw a lot of that aspect out. So it becomes a very lush, very luxurious type of American whiskey that I like quite a lot.
Hmm.
But again, I get it why people might not like that.
Well, you're a heck of a salesman for George Dickel. That was quite the pitch. I feel like I don't have enough George Dickel whiskey in the house. I'm gonna have to go doing a little looking around.
Well, I know in whiskey classes, I've always liked to have a bottle of one of the Dickels available just to show that American whiskey can have, I, I'm not going to say an Armagnac quality to it, but it can have a richness to it that is, to me, akin to Armagnac.
Hmm. That's an interesting point. I can tell you that I don't think anybody disagrees that there is something unique about Georgia Dickel, whether you like it or you don't like it.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
that's why people love it or hate it because of the thing that makes it different, that they're doing something unique, and that's fascinating to me. I mean, I gotta get out there and go see the distillery. But so I'll tell you what is Paul, if there's anything that you want to kind of put out there. I've enjoyed this uh, immensely. I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me a little bit. I'm just very impressed with your history and with your knowledge. I I do want to ask you one more thing though. I'm gonna put you on the spot a little
Oh,
bit.
sure.
Any plans in the future for Jacob's Pardon to be distilling their own, doing their own distillate?
There are rumors to that effect. I
Good
think
enough for me.
there are considerations about a possible distillery site. Um, I think that's probably all I dare say at the moment.
Well, listen, do me a favor and keep me in mind if they open one. But it seems like the natural evolution of things is when you have a product that starts to get out there, and I do worry. I quite often worry when a great product like Jacob's Pardon makes that transition because you're doing this thing so well, and now
Yeah,
you're really starting to do something different.
yeah,
And there are many distilleries that have done it successfully and excelled into the next stage and I'm sure with you there they're going to do exceptionally well just through your experience. But we'll be watching. I know I won't be the only one watching. That'll be very interesting to see what happens down the road. But in the meantime, I can tell you that Jacob's Pardon is one of the ones that is definitely no longer off of my radar, and I think I know where I can get a batch three right now. So I
oh,
may,
good.
I may have to do this. I can tell you a lot of our followers have them. A lot of our followers are not shy to go out and spend what it takes to get some of these unique bottles. But I'm going to probably do a review and recommend the batch one because for the money, uh, this is the sleeper. I really, we do not talk about this. I don't hear anybody talking about this, and that is a dang shame after listening to it or tasting it. And I think I'm going to try and maybe change that a little bit and start running my mouth about it a little bit as I tend to do. Thank you very much, Paul, for taking the time, man. This has been personally a lot of fun for me, and I'm just fascinated. I hope to someday run into you someplace in person and shake your hand. But
That would be great. I'd
you know,
love
we're
that.
we're in Northern California, so we have that in common.
We do indeed. Sue and I still have a lot of friends in Northern California. So,
Well, if you do any traveling, you make sure that Clara lets me know, and I will come and find you. Thank you both, Clara. Thanks for making this arrangements. Paul, thanks for taking the time. Absolutely fantastic, man. I appreciate you paying forward some of that information that the massive amount of information that you have stored in that rather regular sized looking head you have there. I don't know how you store all that in there, to be honest with you. All right, I will be watching for you out there as we're traveling around, and hopefully we can run into you at some point.
that would be terrific.
Well, good luck to you in everything that you do, and we will absolutely be watching.